In this lecture presentation, we'll be exploring the world of creative thinking, based on Halpern's textbook Thought and Knowledge, Chapter 10. As always, I recommend having the slides available so you can fill in the blanks and take notes as we proceed through the lecture material. Let's start with some creativity exercises. Number 1, how can you take 1 away from 9 and get 10? I recommend pausing to reflect on this question and see how many solutions you can come up with. Spoiler alert, some answers are that 9 minus -1 would equal 10. Or, if you were to use Roman numerals, 9 in Roman numerals is I followed by x. If you take away the I or the 1, you would be left with an x, which is 10. Another solution would be to take the line out of the 9 and place it to the left of the remaining circle, which could serve as a 0. Alternatively, the word 9 has 11 lines in it, if you make it all with capital letters. So if you take the 1 away, which is the I, so to speak, you'd be left with NNE, which has 10 lines. So you can see there are a lot of creative ways that you can solve this problem. Let's move on to number 2. How can you move 2 matches to fix the equation? Clearly 6 plus 4 is not 4. Again, I recommend pausing to see how many solutions you might be able to come up with on your own. Some answers might be to move the match that is making it a plus sign to the 6, which would make it 8 minus 4 equals 4. Another option would be to take away the bottom left-hand match from the 6, which would make it a 5, and then move that to the top of the 4 at the far right, which would leave you with 5 plus 4 equals 9. Another option would be to take the middle match that is making it a 6 and move it up to the top right, which would then make a 0. 0 plus 4 equals 4. Perhaps you've come up with other solutions too. Now that you've got your creative gears moving, I recommend pausing the recording to view the video Creativity. When it comes to defining creativity, it's difficult to precisely define. And it tends to be difficult because it's defined by its consequences in terms of novelty and quality. It's, in some ways, the ability to use information that is stored in memory to create something new and to go beyond what we've learned. Unusualness and appropriateness vary along quantitative dimensions. Creativity is not a single trait people have or don't have. It tends to be that creativity is often judged by experts in the field. So it's not up to me to decide if a painting is creative or innovative in any way. Synergy, which refers to bringing together seemingly disparate parts into a useful and functioning whole, is a big part of creativity. Creativity tends to be enhanced in groups of diverse team members. If you can take ideas from different domains and bring them together so that they work successfully in a new context, you've demonstrated synergy. Creativity is enhanced because there's a breadth of knowledge and perspectives that permit the combination of ideas across various domains of knowledge. This is why it's important to work with people who have different areas of experience and expertise, and also why it is so important to have a broad range of knowledge from which to draw on. This is one of the primary arguments as to why a liberal arts education can be very important and useful. It's also what underlies jokes being funny or witty. Most jokes demonstrate synergy in some way because they bring together 2 ideas that are not usually combined. For example, puns. Creative discoveries may also involve serendipity, which is an unexpected or unplanned discovery. While creativity may involve serendipity, it's also important to recognize that we must ultimately value the unexpected discovery. For example, if a chemist were to spill two substances and go and just clean it up quickly, nothing would have come from that event, besides maybe a little bit of headache. Alternatively, if that chemist were to notice that maybe there was a slight change in the smell or the texture or the color, and decide that maybe that was relevant information and pursue investigating further, that might be the beginning of a really important discovery. So while luck does play a role, it's also very important that the individual recognize what is in front of them. Not only is recognition important, but persistence, motivation, and hard work are needed to bring that discovery to a successful place of reaching its potential. It means bringing that idea to a variety of individuals and being able to sell people on what you have discovered or what you have created. Howard Gardner, who we've spoken about previously in terms of multiple intelligences, removes luck from the creative process in terms of his theory of creativity. He does this by stating that creative individuals regularly solve problems and/or create products that are innovative. Luck does not happen over and over and over again, and so by defining it in terms of regularity and consistency, he has removed luck from the equation. So what do we know about the people who regularly solve problems and/or create products in creative ways? The first is that these individuals tend to be unconventional with a low need for conformity. By definition, creativity means crossing or extending barriers. And so for people who are very concerned about the need for conformity and for fitting in, this can be quite challenging to push these boundaries. Creative individuals also tend to be very flexible and open to change. They are pushing these barriers, and again, that requires a level of openness that people who are less creative tend to not have to the same degree. Moreover, they generally have a more internal source of validation. Because creativity can make people uncomfortable, change can be scary for people, and things that are new are oftentimes met with some resistance. Creative individuals need to find a way to validate themselves in order to continue to be persistent in the face of criticism, which is also related to the self-confidence to continue, that these individuals believe in what they're doing and tend to believe in themselves. Creative personalities also tend to have a love or joy for cognitively complex pursuits. Creativity, by definition, is complex. There's no book to read about something that hasn't been created yet. They're also highly self-motivated and persistent. Creative pursuits are difficult, and it does take quite a bit of willpower, or to use a term from our last lecture presentation, grit. They also tend to be open-minded and have high openness to experience. These are people who not only tend to enjoy trying new things and having new experiences, but also have an ability and willingness to take risks and to tolerate ambiguity, which can be quite difficult for people who have more black and white approaches to life. Interestingly, these people also tend to be more sensitive to sensory experiences. They use their senses as windows to the world. That means experiencing the physical world with greater intensity, as well as a tendency to notice and/or remember critical aspects of the environment and of problems that less creative people are more likely to overlook. For those of you who like to pause the recording to view the videos, you should pause here to view the video where good ideas come from. In terms of the stages of creative thinking, there are 3 primary stages: generation, exploration, and evaluation. That is, to generate ideas, explore the problem space, and evaluate various solution paths. Generation, exploration, and evaluation are principles that can be applied across domains to creative thinking and to creative problem solving. Geneplore is a model that was developed by Finke et al. In 1992. It is both a strategy and an explanation of critical thinking. The Geneplore model refers to 2 separate processes: generation of mental structures, such as concepts and images, and exploration, in which these concepts and images can be modified or expanded upon to produce something new. The Geniplor model is essentially refers to the repeated cycles of generation and exploration and the novel properties that emerge from mental play. The incubation stage, as we discussed in the problem-solving lecture, may also be important in terms of creativity. As we discussed, incubation facilitates the possibility of new insights and novel approaches. Insights are new ideas that represent the connection between two previously unconnected nodes. That is, when a new idea suddenly occurs to someone, personal knowledge networks have been successfully traveled from one area to another. Creativity is enhanced during incubation because rest and play free the mind from cognitive limitations. That includes mental sets, functional fixedness, tax working memory, exhaustion, etc. Sometimes trying too hard actually impairs creative thinking. That's why taking a nap, relaxing, getting a good night's sleep are all things that can improve creativity. Before I turn to the next slide, I want to read you a riddle. A man owes a merchant money and is going to be thrown in jail because he doesn't have it. The old and ugly merchant proposes that he will cancel the merchant's debt in exchange for the man's young and beautiful daughter. The merchant says they will leave it up to luck by putting one white and one black pebble from the pebble-strewn path they are standing on into an empty money bag and have the girl pick one of the pebbles out of the bag. If she picks the black pebble, she will become his wife and the debt would be canceled. And if she picks the white pebble, the debt will be canceled and they will both be free. Reluctantly, they agree. As the merchant leans down to pick 2 pebbles from the path, the girl notices that he has picked up 2 black pebbles and put them in the money bag. He then asks the girl to pick out the pebble that was to decide her and her father's fate. What would you do if you had been the girl? Approaches to thinking have been categorized in various ways, as we've discussed throughout the course. One of the ways we have not yet discussed is vertical versus lateral thinking. Vertical thinking refers to careful, logical, and straightforward forms of thinking about problems. It generally involves the refinement or improvement of existing ideas. Typical vertical answers are unlikely to be particularly helpful in the riddle with the merchant and the pebbles. It would involve potentially letting the girl sacrifice herself or expose him as a crook. It's rational thinking, but it's not inventive, out of the box, or creative. Lateral thinking, on the other hand, is thinking around the problem and is a synonym for creative thinking or for idea discovery. A lateral solution to the riddle would be having the girl fumble when she draws the pebble from the bag, dropping it onto the pebble-strewn path. She should then tell the merchant that they can determine the color of the pebble she took by seeing the color of the one left in the bag. You can see how this is a much more creative solution to the problem and more likely to be an effective solution than some of the vertical solutions. I do want to note that everyone is capable of both types of thinking. This is more about attitude, practice, effort, and a variety of other factors that influence the way that we approach problem solving and thinking in general. Let's move on to looking at other ways of categorizing approaches to creative problem solving. A paradigm is an example that is used as a pattern. And so, a vertical approach in terms of paradigms is to think in terms of these paradigms. That is, the typical way of viewing or responding to a problem. The next option would be to stretch the paradigm. That involves perhaps a twist on the paradigm or an extension of that paradigmatic thinking. The next step is rejecting the paradigm. This is the most akin to creativity because it involves changing the nature of how the person is thinking or responding. The example discussed in the textbook is a good one. Halpern discusses how Callaway wanted to increase sales of golf clubs. So Callaway wanted to sell more golf clubs. How could they go about doing that? The paradigmatic thinking approach would be to advertise to everyone. That is the typical way to get people to purchase more of your product. Perhaps increase advertising budgets so that the advertisements could reach more people. Stretching the paradigm might involve strategically advertising to golfers. Instead of just reaching more people, the plan could be to advertise to a select group of golfers, perhaps a commercial during the PGA Tour. The next option is to reject the paradigm. And this is what Callaway did in this example. Callaway decided to create a new club for non-golf players to attract new players, and that is new business. There are only so many golf clubs that existing players will be willing to purchase. What they did was change the nature of the problem that's being solved. Instead of deciding how much money to spend on advertising and who to advertise to, the creative team at Callaway came up with the idea to target women who don't as often play golf, but do play quite a bit of tennis at these same country clubs. This suggests that they could afford to play golf, but are choosing not to for some reason. The creative team at Callaway looked at the relationship between tennis and golf and determined that potentially more women would play golf if they designed a club with a bigger head, which would make it easier to learn how to play. If you've never played golf before, there's a lot of pressure to move along since there are people behind you waiting to play, and not necessarily patiently. They also determined that women's clubs would benefit from higher lofts and shorter, more flexible shafts, because the average woman is shorter and has a slower swing speed than the average male. These design changes brought more women to playing golf, and hence more people who opted to purchase a set of new clubs. They saw a business opportunity because this creative act involved rejecting the business-as-usual paradigm and capitalized on the analogy of golf to tennis, which is something we'll discuss in a couple of slides. Now that we've looked at creative problem solving in business, let's take a look at how we might use creative problem solving in therapy. A couple has come in for marriage counseling. The wife thinks her husband spends too much time at work, and if he really loved her, he would spend more time at home. The husband says he has a great deal of pressure at the office, and that he has to work long hours to get ahead. If his wife loved him more, she would understand. If you were the therapist, what would you say? Now, let's consider how else this problem can be conceptualized or defined. For example, the therapist might conceptualize the problem for the couple as, should we get a divorce? How can we find more ways to spend time together? How can we assure each other that we're still in love? How can the husband get ahead while spending less time at work? How can they learn to adjust to the present situation? Is getting ahead an important goal? What can the wife do so that she doesn't feel lonely and resentful when her husband is at work? You can hopefully see how redefining or restating the problem in multiple ways might help elicit solution paths that might otherwise not have been considered. This is a lateral thinking strategy, and as you might be noticing, the nature of the solutions will change every time the problem is redefined or more information is gained. Therapists who reframe problems can help families, couples, and individuals overcome destructive patterns and conflicts by teaching creative solutions to their problems. Knowing more information is also a helpful strategy for finding an effective solution, and that may involve actively paying attention to strengths and what is working. In this case, knowing more information could be helpful. For example, because maybe you would find out that the wife is an aspiring artist and encourage her to spend more time engaging in those pursuits so she can feel more satisfied, more fulfilled, and less lonely and deserted. Redefining the problem in the past riddle of the pebbles example would shift the question from what should I do to avoid picking the black pebble to how can I avoid the appearance that I picked up the black pebble. As you can probably tell, the second way of stating or framing that problem is much more likely to lead to creative and effective solutions. As we discussed in the Callaway example, analogies are quite often part of the creative process. Analogical thinking refers to when we make a decision about something new in our experience by drawing on a parallel to something old or previously known. It requires the ability to note resemblances and correspondence between two objects while knowing the differences. Analogies help us make sense of the world, to understand new events, and to communicate thoughts. They can be used to view strange things in familiar contexts, as well as familiar problems in new contexts. Creativity often requires the ability to note resemblances while also maintaining awareness of the differences. An early example of analogical thinking and analogical problem solving is Archimedes' discovery of how to weigh a gold crown. Because a crown is irregularly shaped, it could not be measured with their present formulas or concepts. His creative insight was mediated by the analogy of his body displacing the bathtub water, and the knowledge that a gold crown would displace a predetermined volume of water as well. Analogies are also commonly used to creatively bridge innovations across fields. For example, an angioplasty, which is a procedure used for a blockage of the coronary artery, is a life-saving procedure that involves unclogging the arteries with expandable stents and balloons. A thin tube is threaded into the artery, and when the clog is reached, a small balloon is inflated to open the clogged area. This is the same technique plumbers have used for ages to open clogged pipes. Another example is the invention of the foldable baby stroller. This was a cross-industry innovation that was based on an airplane's retractable landing gear. Another example is the Dyson vacuum, which was designed based on the cyclone that's created in a sawmill. Analogies are not only used to bridge innovations across fields, they're also used to inspire innovation based on natural phenomena, which, as an umbrella term, is referred to as bioinspiration. I do want to note that the three terms that I'm about to review are overlapping, and they are oftentimes used somewhat interchangeably. Bionics initially was a term that was meant to combine bio from biology and nix from technics, and it was coined by Jack Steele in 1960. It aims to translate information about living systems to help solve design challenges, primarily information from biology. One example is that Velcro is modeled after the adhesion used by cockleburrs. Biomimetics combines the term bio, for life, and mimesis, which means to imitate. It was coined by Otto Schmidt, based on his development of a physical device that was able to mimic the electrical actions of nerves. Unlike bionics, biomimetics seeks to utilize our understanding of nature's more mechanical processes. Biomimetic prostheses are advanced devices that mimic both the physical and functional properties of the body part it was designed to replace. It is the closest to restoring the natural form and function of that body part. This includes not only limbs and hands, but also eyes. There is development towards bringing sight to people who are otherwise have been blind for most, if not all, of their lives. Prosthetics have come a long way, and they're getting better every day. Biomimicry refers to innovation that is inspired by nature, a term and definition coined by Janine Benyus in the 1970s. It is not only the inspiration of new ideas, but it also serves as the standard by which innovation can be judged. It is primarily related to ecological systems and informs innovations you'll see in this week's video, Nature-Inspired Technology, which you might consider pausing here to view. The Remote Associates Test is a measure of creative potential developed by Martha Mednick in 1962. It was designed to measure creativity through analogies. That is, it is meant to tap dimensions of creativity that involve forming connections between seemingly different topics. Test takers are given 3 words and are asked to come up with a 4th word that relates to all 3. While there's very little direct evidence that tests like these can predict creativity in natural contexts, they're nonetheless used quite often as a measure of creativity. I've chosen 10 at random to try together But if you're interested in many, many more examples, you can find them on the website remote-associates-test.com. Let's start with number 1. What word could combine cottage, Swiss, and cake? I'll give the answers to each after a brief pause. So if you do not want to know the answers right away, please pause and try to solve these on your own, and then come back to listen to the answers. So number 1 is cheese. Cottage cheese, Swiss cheese, cheesecake. Number 2, what word would work for river, note, and blood? The answer here is bank. A river bank, a bank note, and a blood bank. 3, loser, throat, and spot. The answer here is sore. A sore loser, a sore throat, or a sore spot. 4, sense, courtesy, and place. The answer is common. Common sense, common courtesy, and commonplace. Number 5, stick, maker, and point. The answer here is match. Matchstick, matchmaker, match point. Number 6, cross, rein, and tie. Is bow a crossbow, a rainbow, and a bow tie? Number 7, tank, hill, and secret. The answer is top. Tank top, hill top, and top secret. Number 8, fence, card, and master. The answer is post. Fence post, postcard, and postmaster. 9, illness, bus, and computer. Is terminal, a terminal illness, a bus terminal, and a computer terminal. Lastly, self, attorney, and spending. The answer is defense. Self-defense, a defense attorney, and defense spending. There are 2 videos this week about encouraging creativity. So if you prefer to pause the recordings to view the videos, I recommend pausing here to view video 1, Habits of Original Thinkers, and 2, How to Build Your Creative Confidence. Research shows that creativity can be enhanced, which makes sense in light of the research that we've discussed previously in terms of being able to improve our problem solving and critical thinking in general. One aspect of creativity that is important to work on is resilience. Resilience is important because creativity, by definition, is different. People may not understand your ideas or get on board at first, and persistence is essential for successful creative endeavors. Next, to cultivate the intrinsic motivation to succeed. Intrinsic motivation refers to motivation that comes from inside, as opposed to extrinsic motivation that refers to motivation we experience from external or outside forces, such as grades or parents' expectations of us. Researchers in this area have pointed to the importance of intrinsic motivation and to the negative consequences of extrinsic motivation in terms of stifling creativity. Hennessy 2001 presents a list referred to as the 6 killers of intrinsic motivation. That includes constant evaluation, surveillance, reward, competition, restricted choices, and extrinsic orientation towards work. While creativity can flourish in environments of extrinsic motivation, you can see from this list how our school and work systems tend to be on the negative end of each side of this spectrum, and thereby may be diminishing creativity that might otherwise be more prominent. Speaking of education, another aspect that does encourage creativity is acquiring a broad range of knowledge. Creative thinking involves a search of memory for all relevant information, and that's one reason why experts sometimes have a harder time being creative in their own fields. The ability to retrieve a well-known solution or a response hinders creativity. The more knowledge we have, the more ways to interconnect knowledge structures, and therefore the more potential for creativity when we have knowledge in multiple fields. The potential for creative insights, therefore, is heightened by general education classes because it aids individuals in acquiring a broad understanding of concepts and therefore more opportunities for combining various concepts across fields to innovate in interesting and different ways. When it comes to enhancing creativity, you not only want to conduct broad searches of memory, that is, you don't stop thinking about the problem as soon as you reach a singular solution, but you also want to practice synthesizing information that's been retrieved. The more you practice combining information in novel ways, the more likely you are to come upon a combination that is useful and effective. Next, allowing for incubation. This is something we've discussed previously in this lecture, as well as in the problem-solving lecture. As you know, incubation often leads to insights, and the fewer constraints that restrict creative inspiration and flow, the more likely the individual is to thrive in their creativity. That means it's important to rest and take time off. Lastly, practice using various creativity strategies. We'll look at some strategies for increasing the quantity of ideas on the next slide, and then we'll conclude the lecture by reviewing 4 formal strategies that can help inspire creative thinking as well. Quantity breeds quality. Creative people have many more good and bad ideas. The more ideas you have, the more likely you are to have some really excellent one among them. One approach to creating quantity is to brainstorm. That could be brainstorming individually, using, for example, a mind map, or in groups. Groups can be amazing for creative discovery, as long as that group's not subjected to groupthink. Next, activating inert knowledge. This is ways of tickling memory to improve ideational fluency, or the flow of ideas. An example would be listing topic-relevant words before writing a paper or taking an exam. By listing topic-relevant words, individuals require themselves to think about their knowledge of the topic before they begin to write or answer questions, which improves their access to the knowledge in their memories and helps plan the response. It also helps to eliminate writer's block because it's a way of activating one's knowledge on the topic so that it can be used more effectively. Browsing sources for information can also be very important. You can't make remote associations or borrow ideas from other fields if your knowledge is confined to a narrow discipline. For example, going to the library and seeing the books on the shelves, reading newspapers, magazines, biographies, scholarly journals, children's books, joke books, etc., can all provide interesting angles to view the world or expose you to new concepts that might be very important for your own creativity. Taking notes, as we've discussed many times, is important, particularly for reducing the load on working memory. As our working memory becomes increasingly taxed, our ability to be creative becomes increasingly diminished. Asking questions from people in different fields and those with expertise in the area you're interested in can also provide new ways of looking at the problem or new angles for innovation and discovery. Likewise, seeking input as you move along can also be very helpful. You never know what insight might be standing between you and your solution. Visualization can also be very powerful, as we've discussed in problem solving. Visual thinking is common. Many people report thinking in images, at least some of the time. And these images are just picture-like representations in the mind that serve as an alternative thinking language that may facilitate people to see the problem more concretely. Research shows a positive relationship between imagery and creativity, which was particularly strong for individuals with high IQs. Good imagers should be able to see problems in ways that may help them generate solutions that are different from their peers who are low in the ability to create images. Lastly, waiting to evaluate. It's so important not to jump to evaluation. We must spend a good amount of time in the brainstorming process. The best ideas often come from a combination or synergy or alteration, so it's important not to rush the process and not to remove something from consideration that may be useful in some way down the line. We'll end the lecture by looking at 4 formal strategies for creative thinking, starting with creativity checklists. There are many, many checklists available of diverse categories, adjectives, and questions that might apply to an issue or problem or project. These checklists encourage us to think differently or more broadly. One caveat is that while they are generally helpful for increasing the variety of thought around a certain topic, it can have an inhibiting effect if the list is too short. I always encourage individuals who are using creativity checklists to use multiple checklists to help prevent this from occurring. One example of a creativity checklist is aids in thinking of physical change, and it might have a list such as add or subtract something, change the color, change the material, change by rearranging parts, change the shape, change the size, change the design or style. A generalized list might look like put to other uses, adapt, modify, magnify, minimize, substitute, rearrange, reverse, combine. For example, let's say I was trying to identify a potential problem that I could explore in a research study. If I looked at a creativity checklist that said counterexamples or thinking about ways the opposite is true, and maybe I was interested in how bad parenting might lead to neuroses in their children, the counterexample it would prompt me to explore would be, could bad parenting lead to good mental health? Reverse causal direction. Perhaps I think of coffee as leading to headaches, and it would be interesting to explore if having headaches leads people to drink more coffee. Pushing an example to the extreme. If children's use of grammar shows that they learned the general grammatical rules, what would perfect grammar in children suggest? Extrapolate from similar problems. If older adults can improve their memory for names with mnemonics, maybe they can use mnemonics to remember places. Shift attention to the opposite end of a problem. Maybe instead of thinking about the cost of a new technology, you think about the benefits and potentially the money it might save. Pay attention to outliers or unusual responses. What is it about person X that led them to respond differently than the other participants? Next is attribute listing. This involves listing every characteristic or attribute of an item or situation and then examining them for possible modification and recombination. It helps to ensure that all parts of the problem have been considered and examined, and reduces the likelihood of negative impacts of mental sets and functional fixedness. The next approach is a relational algorithm. Relational algorithms are sets of relational words that can be used to inspire creativity by using them in sentences about your problems. Krovitz listed 42 words. They include about, across, after, against, among, and, as, at, because, before, between, but, by, down, for, from, if, in, near, not, now, of, off, on, opposite, or, out, over, round, still, so, then, though, through, till, to, under, up, when, where, while, and with. Van Gundy expanded the list to include prepositions, including above, along, amid, around, behind, below, beneath, beside, beyond, during, except, into, past, since, throughout, toward, upon, within, and without. Let's give this a shot. Let's pretend that a doctor needs strong enough rays to hit a tumor with an X-ray without killing the surrounding healthy tissue. That doctor might go about using these relational terms to try to inspire new ways of thinking about the problem. For example, take the rays through the esophagus. The goal here is to use these relational words in sentences about the problem. We could use the word from, take the sensitivity from the tissues, take tissue off the tumor, Take strong rays after weak rays. Take a shield on the stomach walls. Take the tumor across the stomach. Use weaker rays around the area. Krovitz claims that this method works well because it forces the individual to consider new relationships among the parts of the problem. Lastly, PMI, which is plus, minus, interesting. Plus minus interesting was developed by Edward Bono as a strategy to enhance lateral creative thinking. Here, we list all of the givens in a problem and all of the possible solutions, even the ones that are unrealistic, and consider for each what is positive about it, what is negative about it, and what makes it interesting. This helps find new solutions by highlighting positive aspects and eliminating the negative ones. The use of the interesting category helps the problem solver to consider what makes a solution interesting, and thereby lead to consideration of additional alternatives. This is a great plan for beginning the creative problem-solving process. List all of the givens and all of the possible solutions, and then rate the PMI. Again, the pluses, the positive factors or aspects, the anticipated benefits of the results or the outcomes, the minuses, which are the negative factors or aspects, the anticipated drawbacks in the problems, and the interesting, not necessarily plus or minus, but something that is noteworthy and may be valuable to take into consideration as you work towards a creative solution, discovery, or innovation.